Hello everyone. The Bible tells us that sinning has serious consequences. And there are a number of religious leaders, in fact probably thousands, maybe millions, who will teach you that sinning has serious consequences if you're not a Christian. But if you're a Christian, sinning doesn't have serious consequences. If you really stop and think about it, it's kind of a pretty crazy teaching that they have. You sin, it has serious consequences for every human being, but then you become a Christian and now your sinful acts don't have serious consequences anymore. And people sort of have this notion that the world sins this much, but Christians sin noticeably less. They only sin this much. People kind of have that idea out there. Let's see what Jesus says about this. Matthew 5:27-30. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and cast it away. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be cast into hell, or Gehenna. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and cast it away, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Matthew 5:27-30. So let's look at this part first. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The first thing you got to remember is the context here, where Jesus is repeatedly saying, you have heard it said, but I say to you. Adultery was a sin under the law. But as long as someone did not commit physical adultery, they had not committed a sin. But the point of Jesus' teaching here is that he's calling his disciples to a higher standard than the law. Men have told many lies about this passage. And what they do is they'll confuse and conflate the temptation to sin with committing the sin itself. But being tempted to sin is not a sin. The temptation to sin is not a sin. Our flesh, because we're human, that's what we are, routinely has sinful desires of many kinds. If you read in Galatians 5, Paul talks about the sins of the flesh and all the things that the flesh always wants to do. But we have not sinned if we deny our flesh and its desires. The temptation to sin is not a sin. And many men are interpreting this verse and preaching about this verse as if the temptation to sin is sin. So a provocatively dressed woman walks by, a man sees this, he has a temptation, oh, he's committed a sin, he deserves hell, according to their preaching. No, that's a lie. Having a fleshly desire and then denying that fleshly desire is a temptation. It's not the commission of a sin. Jesus is talking about willfully entertaining adultery with another woman, or a woman with another man, if you like. Under the law, adultery was defined only as a fleshly, physical act. But now Jesus defines fantasizing about adultery in your heart as adultery. Okay? It's not just a temptation. A flash in the pan temptation. This is when someone is entertaining the idea. You don't need to think about this very hard. If your own spouse has not physically committed adultery with someone else, but your spouse has fantasized in his or her heart about committing adultery with that person, have they still not betrayed you? Is the difference really that big? And is not the adultery they commit in their heart not proof that they would cheat on you if they could get away with it? It is. That's what it is. Or something very close to that, at least. So let's not continue misinterpreting that verse and telling lies about that verse. Jesus isn't confusing temptation to sin with the act of sin. And many men are interpreting and preaching about that verse as if the two are one and the same. And that's just not true. Next, Jesus says, if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and cast it away, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be cast into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and cast it away, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Have you ever observed how people will try and nullify these words of Jesus? You see this all the time. It's very routine. When people come to this verse, many of them, their first reaction is to try to void Jesus' message here, to nullify his point, nullify his words. And they have various ways of doing that. One of the common ones is, Jesus didn't really mean you should, cut off your hand. And they're almost implying like, Jesus didn't really mean you should stop sinning by saying that. You see, they're just trying to confuse the issue and nullify Jesus' words, or confuse the issue enough that they walk away and completely forget about this teaching. They don't want this teaching to have any relevance in their lives, and that's what they're really trying to do with their reactions or responses to this passage. But what is Jesus' point here? What's his point? His point is this: which is better? Make your choice. To enter life with one hand, or to enter hell with two hands? Would you rather enter hell with two hands, or would you rather enter eternal life with one? Jesus' point here is pretty plain. Your acts of sin are so serious that it would indeed be better for you to cut off your hand and enter life with one hand than to continue in that sin and enter hell with two hands. That's his point. He's describing the seriousness of sinning. And remember who he's teaching this to: his disciples. He's teaching this to his disciples. How you live your life matters. How you live your life matters. But people don't want to be responsible. They want to be like spoiled little kids who are irresponsible. They want all the freedom they can get with no responsibility. Every parent knows about that. You see that in teenagers. That's one of the biggest problems with teenagers. They want limitless freedom, no responsibility. And every adult knows that in this world, you can't have freedom without responsibility. It just doesn't happen. You need to stop sinning, Jesus is teaching, or you will end up going into hell. It doesn't matter what you think hell is. It's pretty serious. At least we can say that much. And he's saying, don't even commit adultery in your heart, or that's where you're going to end up. You're going to end up going into hell. So Jesus doesn't really want us to cut off our hands. But that doesn't mean we forget about his point in this passage. His point is, if your hand causes you to sin, yes, it would be better to cut it off than to go to hell with two hands. But people try to use this to nullify the verse. He does mean, if you don't cut off your sin, you're going to hell. And he uses this imagery to illustrate and demonstrate how serious it is to keep continuing in your sin. Two hands into hell. Yay for you. And because people love their creedal doctrines better than the words and the teaching of God the Father, which is what Jesus is delivering here. The Bible tells us that. This is God's teaching, God the Father's. Rather than accept what God the Father says, they accept what their creedal doctrines say, because their creedal doctrines absolve them of having any responsibility. They can, they don't have to stop sinning. They just have to act more respectably than people in the world. And that kind of will count for it, or something goofy like that. Just a little bit less than everybody else. That's not what Jesus says. Jesus is showing his disciples how serious it is. The Hebrews writer says something similar. If we willfully continue in sin, he says, there's no more sacrifice for sins for us. We're done. We're finished. The Lord will judge his people, he says. But people are always looking for excuses. They're always looking for ways to justify themselves. And so they begin with their rationalizing, their self-deceptions, and they'll delude themselves when they see passages like this because they don't like them. They want to gather around teachers who tickle their itching ears. Tell me what I want to hear. Don't tell me what I need to hear. Tell me what I want to hear. I'm going to go find me a pastor who tells me what I want to hear. What good's that going to do you on Judgment Day? Jesus makes it very clear how serious this sin is. He's showing us the gravity of sin, and he's telling us that as his disciples, we have to stop sinning. And when I say that, we all know another little game people play. And we'll leave that one for another video. God bless you.